My name is Fandy. I've been a long time WoW player since Burning Crusade, pretty much. Done a lot of different things in WoW. I feel like kind of a well-rounded player. I've done Mythic raiding, I collect mounts, Mythic Plus, things like that. So, yeah, that's me. I'm a streamer. Been streaming for 8 years or so now. So,
Oh, wow. Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Hi, my name is Morgan. I am one of the associate game directors on World of Warcraft.
And yeah, I'm Patrick Scarborough. I am a senior game designer on World of Warcraft, specifically the rewards team, handling items and like progression systems and stuff like that.
Okay. I guess I will just get right on into it. So,
Yeah, let's go for it.
Can you elaborate on the gear progression system in 10.2 and how it'll be different to 10.1? It felt like it was almost too powerful. Will be adjustments to things, for example, like how fast you can upgrade your gear?
Yeah, actually, I'm very happy to answer this one. I am a big fan of the universal upgrade system. You know, it was something that was worked on by a lot of members of my team, and they were, it was pitched as an experiment. It was like, well, let's do this for one season and see how it goes, right? And after we saw how it played out in Embers of Malfurion, we're happy to say that it's going to come back tentatively full time, but with a lot of adjustments. One of those, to get it out of the way, as you mentioned, is we saw that people were gaining item levels like very quickly relative to how they would normally progress in a patch. It's something that you and probably a lot of people felt. But we also saw that there were a lot of positives to the system as well. So we want to be very careful that, I think a lot of people have been like, oh no, they're gonna dunk on it. It's gonna be completely ruined. No, we are basically making it so that you can only get we'll say so I'm getting caught up on all the changes in my mind. We're reducing the amount of upgrades that you can make per week. So if you think like right now you could do like 10 individual upgrades before you're capped for the week, that's going to move to about 6. But there's a whole host of other changes, especially a lot of quality of life changes that the community has asked for that we're responding to. So in one, we're actually making each of the tracks larger. So there's a lot more smoother progression between, say, like all of Heroic and all of Mythic, right? If you remember, the Myth track was added in the Fractures of Time 10.15 update, so that people who can do the early Mythic bosses are still able to actually get meaningful gear. It's not just kind of like throwaway stuff once you hit a certain level. We're also making crests a currency. Crest fragments are going away, and they're just going to be replaced by crests. So no more like you have to use this to combine to get this. It's just it's one thing that you still have the 4 sort of difficulty tiers, if you want to think of them that way. But they all live in the currency tab. So you're welcome for 8
bag space.
Bag space is back, baby. It's all there, and we're excited about that. And then while there's a bunch of other changes, one more that I want to talk about that I think people will be happy about is if you are capped on a certain kind of crest in a given week and you do content that would reward a crest, it gives you the one below that. So a common thing that came up very often was like people who are doing high Mythic Plus keys, but they need worm crests because they kind of need something to bridge the gap. And it's like, well, I don't want to go spam 11s or something to just make it easy. Like that's not useful for me or anyone. You can just keep doing all your keys for the week and it will just say, okay, let's start filling you out on the lower one. And then when those are done, let's start filling you out on the lower one, right? And so you can eventually get all of them for whatever purposes you might need them for. So a bit rambly, but the TLDR is we really like it. We want it to stay and we want it to be healthy for the game. And so trying to limit how fast people can get ahead right at the start, but actually allowing you to advance better and more stages later into a patch. So hopefully a smoother progression and something that feels like it doesn't just kind of peak and then stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are perfect changes. So, were you guys happy with the tuning of the Aberrus raid? And can we expect the Emergisil raid to have similar tuning and difficulty?
It's funny that you asked this question immediately after
right after the item upgrade one.
The item upgrade one, because
these might be linked.
Those two are very connected, right? Ultimately, when we hear about Aberrus tuning in particular, there's a lot of focus on the Mythic raid difficulty, where people felt like that died a little quicker. But we also really think it's important to look at the whole spectrum, right? Not only from LFR, which is where spoilers, the vast majority of our players actually experience it is in LFR, and then from normal to heroic all the way up to mythic. Ultimately we felt like the progression in Aberrus when we think about itemization and rewards as like a soft nerf to the raid, right? Like if on week 4 or whatever, your mythic guild is still kind of repping on a boss, and maybe you're hitting a couple barriers that you just need a little more DPS to get over. Ideally, gear is the thing that you are acquiring to help you get over that hurdle. And as we saw in Aberrist, you kind of hit that gear saturation point like much earlier than in previous expansions. So if people, well, one, it either led to people, kind of killing things a lot quicker than they might have expected, or there were the people on the other end of the spectrum who were still running into roadblocks there, right? Maybe their skill level isn't as high. And then they didn't really have any ground to go to, right? They were just kind of stuck and they're like, well, do we wait for nerfs? Like, we're not getting much more gear. So we definitely think that these, things were very intertwined between one another. Ultimately, we always kind of have our tuning targets across all difficulties. The mythic, there was a couple, I think, adjustments we said we might have changed. Like if you would have changed the position of like Rashok and Magmarax or something, we would have tuned one of those a bit more, and they had a couple more knobs there. But ultimately, generally happy with it. And then just a better understanding of the item upgrade system as well as these changes, we think will help with where the tuning lands on our new raid. This is a mouthful. Amir Drasil, Dreams Hope, which is the new raid in Guardians of the Dream. So we're really, really geeked out about that raid. It's got some really cool themes, some pretty epic raid bosses. Lots to talk about there too.
Awesome. Will there be very rare items in the 10.2 raid, like potentially a Druid Legendary? And are there any plans to make it possible for players to potentially target any of the very rare items? Maybe something similar to the Dinar system. I don't know if I said that right, but in Shadowlands Season 4.
It's funny. Now you have me, I made the thing, and now I'm like, did I get it wrong? No. I've always heard it pronounced Dinar.
Okay.
In one way. So they will be returning in this patch. This is something that I've talked about elsewhere, but we at least like what rare items are doing for making like certain re-clears and certain bosses like excitement moments that otherwise you might not appreciate, right? There's at least like a little spike of dopamine on having to kill the first boss again and again, right? Yeah. Because normally you're just like, whatever, I kind of fall asleep. But there might be something for someone that they care about, right? It's certainly been something that we have been, we felt that the launch of Dragonflight, where we introduced them, they were all too powerful and also too rare. And then with this one, there was kind of a pendulum swing backwards in Embers of Neltharion to say, what should rare items be? And we kind of landed on they should be interesting, and we have ways to make them interesting and not just the best items, period. But they should have some sort of value for your raid group, but not literally everyone, right? So if you think about Kazara, 30 people in your raid don't want a screaming black dragon scale, and we think that's cool, right? But there are some specs where like, that's so good for me, I really want that, right? And so the hope is to land in that sweet spot where everyone feels like they have something that is really exciting for them, and that these effects feel like they provide your raid group some like repeat equity and kind of value to re-clearing the raid. With regards to a legendary, I don't have anything to share on that right now. But also, when it comes to targeting things like that, all I can really say is we hear a lot of the feedback that people have on systems like this. Shadowlands Season 4 was an experiment for a reason, and you can see, like little tiny kernels of what is the current upgrade system in some of the stuff that we did then, right? So I think there is an interest, if we can make it work, to try something that could allow for kind of reducing some of this frustration in the future, but it's not something that we have anything lined up for to share on in 10.2. But you never know for the future, right? It's not something that I would want people to close their minds and hearts to in the long run, right?
Okay. Jump around here. Are you guys happy with Augmentation Evoker and the community's reception to it? And would you consider it a success? And could we potentially see more support specializations added in the future?
A couple questions in there.
Yeah.
Overall, I think the kind of excitement around adding a specialization in the middle of an expansion was pretty awesome. Like that reception was really fantastic. There's a lot of really positive feedback from people who enjoy that kind of support playstyle that aren't, in that quite as high stress of a situation as say a healer, because healing is hard. And overall, very happy with the reception. When it comes to kind of the tuning and the very creative ways people have been using them and stacking them, and my favorite was the one where they all had summons pending. That was exciting.
Yeah.
That is, ultimately, things like that are why we launched Augmentation when we did, right? We knew we wanted to get it into the players' hands and let them play with it, and frankly, find ways to break it, right? So that would give us plenty of time to kind of adjust and give ourselves room to make changes leading into Guardians of the Dream. So definitely looking at things that we can do for Augmentation. I know actually just this week, Fury Incarnate is coming out, and there's a couple tweaks with Augmentation there, but that's not the end. We've definitely heard feedback from people about really simple changes we can make that would squash some of the shenanigans, like having certain buffs get canceled on encounter start, like we've done in the past, where we'll reset people's resources. I remember in Nyalotha, like Demonology Warlocks were like cranking all of their resources up right before the pull. So there's things like that we've seen in the past that we have ways to kind of get around. But ultimately very happy with Augmentation. And in terms of other kind of more Augmentation-esque DPS specs, definitely not going to close the door on that. Nothing, obviously nothing for Guardians of the Dream. That would be something that would be a future us thing to look into. But, based on players' reception of it and, the lessons that we learned, there's certainly opportunities to kind of expand that into other specs. I'm sure the Shadow Priests and Enhancement Shamans of the world are looking for something there. So we hear that feedback, but nothing for Guardians of the Dream.
Okay. I know this has been asked before, but is there a possibility in 10-man Mythic raiding, or are we firmly locked into 20-man Mythic? Would love the potential of doing the harder difficulties with a smaller group of friends, and getting 20 people together with similar skill levels and interest and goals can be a logistical nightmare sometimes. So is that something we could maybe see in the future?
I guess two things there. That is one of those types of changes where if there is a future world where we would make a change like that, it would not likely happen on like an update like Guardians of the Dream. It would happen like on an expansion boundary. So not anything for Guardians of the Dream in that regard. In terms of future us, we've had the same kind of raid structure for several expansions now. It almost feels like a miracle. Like it felt like, actually, you mentioned you've been playing since Burning Crusade. Like from BC to Wrath to every expansion, there was something different. Something changes about how our raids worked, and we've kind of felt like we hit that sweet spot with, we've got our scaling difficulty where, hey, I always used to make the joke like, I hope you have exactly 19 friends, because if you have 20, somebody isn't going to be able to play that night. So having that flex scaling really felt like a huge improvement in the overall enjoyment of the game. And then having mythic difficulty, there's a fun history there, right? Like, remember, it used to be 40-player raids, and then that always changed. There's always going to be a number where whether or not we decrease it, the social structures will, kind of evolve to support that, and then sometimes it'll be hard to have the correct number of players on your roster, and that's something that we feel like from a pure design perspective, having that kind of fixed raid size really opens the door to not only more options from a composition perspective. You're going to see a lot more variety in which specs and classes people are bringing, but also it allows the encounter designers to kind of create their encounters with certain assumptions, right? Like, hey, I can assume you have a warlock, so we can use a gateway for this encounter, right? Like we saw some of that on different encounters through time, essentially.
Yeah.
I guess Painsmith was one where
Painsmith was one that you was required to have a warlock gate to get through one of the spike walls.
That's a fun story, though. Yeah. Painsmith is a funny one, though, because we designed it with the gateway in mind to get through the solid wall, and then we were watching one of the streamers do it, and like 2 people died. And we were like, and then like, oh well, that doesn't work. And we're like, no, that's supposed to work. So it was a bug that we ended up having to fix. But yeah, there's opportunities like that to design really interesting mechanics that, when you go below 20, it gets a lot more narrow there. So nothing that we're looking to change in the immediate future, but certainly it's something that has come up, and it does get discussed, trust me, every expansion. Like, do we want to make any changes? So thank you for asking.
Let's see. With more race class combinations being added, can we expect to see more races maybe having access to the druid class? It feels like 10.2 would be a perfect time for that.
That's a very fun question. Yeah, we have been looking to kind of increase the diversity that our races and classes can be. Ultimately, our goal is to create the, kind of the most inclusive world we can, where people can play what they identify with and play what they want to be, represent their character in game. So we've been really looking to kind of make adjustments there. Druids are a fun one. You're right. This is a great opportunity there.
Yeah.
Not adding new druid classes in this update, but there are cool druid things. There are new customizations for Moonkin, for instance, that are going to be available, as well as some other druid customizations. Actually, Patrick has a couple examples that are going to be in this update.
Yeah, I mean, I think Morgan's touching on something that is just kind of a reality of just game development, right? Which is, we have a goal that we want to work towards, which is getting, it was, I think, 10.15 that introduced like a bunch of new combinations that people felt like they were like, what, those, you couldn't do that before? And it was like, yeah, you can do it now, right? But druids just come with this overhead of like, well, they have so many different forms, right? And I think it's been said and just kind of all around that, like, I think a lot of players might feel dissatisfied if they felt like they didn't have a sufficient number of customizations available to their to their player base. And it's like, how do you can't pull that out of a hat and be like, cool, and now we have everything for the Volpera and the undead, and you can imagine all the crazy ideas that come from that. So in lieu of that, we have, as Morgan said, a lot of customizations that are coming. If people paid attention to the kind of Warlock update that happened in Fractures in Time, where there was, a bunch of demon kind of pet customizations, we're hoping that this will feel very similar, including a lot of neat secrets and collectibles from, the people may have to solve to try to find how to get ones. There may be some druid forms that are more flamey in nature that some people have been asking for, that we think people would be excited about, and especially a few of them that will come from the raid, be those from kind of secret kills or strictly off of a boss that is extremely a very cool druid. So we're really excited to get people into that part of it. And then, eventually long term working on, as Morgan says, this kind of dream of giving a more broadly inclusive World of Warcraft that isn't, purely like, oh, I can't, sorry, if you love Volpera, you can't do this, or if you like goblins, you can't do that, right?
Right. Okay. Let's see. Can we look forward to seeing any more additional allied races?
Which one would you want to see, out of curious?
I don't know, like dryads, something like that. That would be kind of cool.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, no allied race is added in Guardians of the Dream, but it's definitely one of those features that we are always kind of keeping in mind when we're introducing these new cultures, of which one would be really fun to have as an allied race, and which one would make sense to bring into the fold as an allied race as well, versus, there's often these cultures that are introduced within an expansion that, like, yeah, they feel very thematic to this place, and them leaving that place would almost feel strange. So none that are being added in Guardians of the Dream, but very much still a feature that we think is really awesome and amazing, and when there is a opportunity that makes sense, we definitely would look to explore that again.
Okay. Just skimming around here. Do you have any plans on releasing new Battlegrounds in Dragonflight? I think it's been a while since the last one was added.
So there is a really cool new brawl. So if you enjoy Battlegrounds, I also love Battlegrounds. I was joking earlier that I enjoyed doing, I think the community just calls them YOLO RPGs, right? They're just
Yeah.
like, hey, just pop in. If we win or we lose, we're not going to try too hard, but they're super fun. So if you kind of remember the strategy that we had with Shadowlands leading into Dragonflight, we introduced a new brawl called Solo Shuffle in Shadowlands, and that was that idea of having solo queue arenas, essentially. That eventually, was really well received by our players, and eventually turned into a solo queue feature for Dragonflight. So, in Guardians of the Dream, we'll be introducing a brawl called Battleground Blitz. So that is essentially a solo queue for Battlegrounds, and it has a couple changes associated with it that we think would be really successful. So for one, lowering the max player size, as well as making a couple changes to the pool of Battlegrounds that would reduce the duration. More of a target of like 10 to 15 minutes instead of like a 30-minute Battleground, so that you can kind of jump in and jump out a bit easier. So we think that is going to be really fun for players to play around with and give us feedback on if that felt appropriate or not. And something that we thought was, kind of made this feel like it was a more natural fit was Battlegrounds require quite a bit more coordination than, say, an arena at times, right? Like, certainly there are some like very high level arena, which can't make that argument, but
yeah, there's like map wide play depending on where you're at. There's like objectives that you have to capture, or you want, people are always sending like 2 mid, 2,
you're splitting the group up, right? So with, as I mentioned earlier, this week we have Fury Incarnate coming out, which actually has the ping wheel feature, which we think will help players communicate a lot more in like a battleground if they're, maybe they're not on Discord together, or they're not on voice comms in any way. This way they'll be able to say like, hey, you attack here, you attack here. So we think that having that tool included in the game will make something like Battleground Blitz be a lot more successful. So we're excited to see how these things kind of pair together. And I'm personally excited to jump in there and check it out. But I imagine we'll do like a Brawl with the Blues or something on the PTR when that goes up too.
Yeah, like rated Battlegrounds are something that I have never been able to do because it's so difficult to get people together to try them. But I've always had an interest in it, right? I've always been a for fun, casual PvP player, and so whenever something like this comes out, I'm like, yes, I can do. Yeah, like I can do it. I don't have to find the exact people and then queue for the exact battleground and then hope that people are also searching for that. So yeah. Like Morgan said, not exactly a new battleground, but something that, especially with some of the changes that come to them for like match length and just kind of systemic, something that might feel functionally like it is new for a lot of players who maybe can't or don't engage with RPGs.
Speaking of UI, a lot of the changes to the UI have been fantastic so far, but I was wondering if there's any plans to make additional updates to it. Things like unit frames still seem to be a bit lacking. Customization and for healers, for example, still need to use add-ons like click and frame add-ons. So things like the amount of hots on frames show, debuffs, icon sizes, things like that.
Yeah, I think there's some more. Morgan, you may know more than me, but I was going to say I believe they're adding, with the 10.2 update, we have a lot of changes to any classes that have unique resources that are easier to see. So if you have like runic power or holy power or something, that's something that is going to be easier to track. I'm not sure if there's anything specifically for healers in there. Morgan, do you have any thoughts?
So I'm actually super curious because in 10, I want to say it was 10.1, we made some changes where, when you widen your raid frames using edit mode, you could actually see more hots. And then also, I know we added the click casting options as kind of like a baseline. So I'm really curious, like, what other kind of options, since those, I would argue, we have things in the game that hopefully check that box, but it sounds like they're not quite hitting the mark for you. So I'm super curious, like, if there's a specific option or something.
That has a bunch of buttons on it, and it only you can only do button 4 and 5, I think, with the Blizzard click cast. So any things that I have to like manually bind with like a Steel Series software doesn't work for it. So I have to use click. And then I use like bigger debuffs and things like that.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I can totally, talk to the UI leads and see what they have to say about the like multi buttons. I forget what mouse it was. It was like literally an entire numpad on the side of a mouse with one of the mice that I saw back in the day, and I was like, wow, that is exciting. I'm impressed with your thumb accuracy because I feel like I would constantly hit,
I
hit
have
the wrong button.
They're pretty big, so it's not like the little teeny ones. I couldn't do that either. So.
Right, yeah. Okay, cool. And then for the number, so and with the debuff frame, or buff, I think you said hots,
Yeah.
but then you said big debuff. Is it
Yeah,
like
that's-
specific debuffs you want to be able to see larger or smaller?
Like debuffs certain ones, like being bigger, the icons, things like that. I guess
Got it.
I would have to like blow the frame up really big, but
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when it comes to like, I would like, if I'm doing a specific raid encounter, we have a way to make the debuff bigger on the unit frame. It's called a boss aura, like under the hood, and it would make it bigger. But that is something that like a designer has to like set that, and then that says like, hey, this is the living bomb or whatever. Everyone should see this as a big debuff on the unit frame.
This is the big deal. Yeah.
But when it comes to like, hey, my preference is to see this debuff be larger. That's kind of the space where we feel like it's okay for add-ons to kind of cover that ground, right? When we are designing the UI philosophically, we try to make sure it caters to as large an audience as possible. And when it comes to like specific preferences on this encounter, that's a great spot for UI add-ons to come in. But the button binding one is a really good one. I will absolutely follow up on that one.
Okay. With how many new mounts that keep getting added every patch, is there any chance to see a new mount collection meta achievement?
I mean, so I feel like a broken record, as with many of your questions. We don't have one coming in the Guardians of the Dream update, but this is also like, it's more of a when and not an if, right? A lot more mounts have been added to the game. We certainly hear and know that there are a lot of collectors out there who are doing things. But it's interesting, right? We added one right when Dragonflight launched, I believe, and there were a lot of people who were like, well, that wasn't enough for me because I logged in and I got it immediately. And so there's an interesting tension between how do you add one of these things that is actually still like chaseable for the kind of person that wants it. And so I think that's probably why you don't see them like so frequently. But yeah, there's definitely a conversation to be had amongst our team about like, should we do them more frequently, but raise the bar really high? Like, should the next one we add be at like the limit of human collection ability and then let everything kind of fill in after that, or do people want something that is easier for the average person to be like, oh, I can go for it, but may not scratch the itch of the person you're talking about. So TLDR, yes, there will absolutely be one. When it will arrive, we don't know. It just has to feel like, if we keep laying them down in front of you and people keep knocking them down immediately, it's like, is that satisfying anybody, right? Or would it be easier to wait and do a really big one?
Well, the one for me too is I'm always like, do you want this, or are you like, thank God I'm done?
Yeah,
I
feel like people are
doing
split
this,
halfway. I someone that I play with got the otter and was like, thank God I'm done. But I know people who are like, this is nothing to me. Give me the 1,000, so yeah, it's interesting, right? There's a lot of different people to try to serve with something like this. So yes, it will happen eventually, and we should try to find a way to make it satisfying to those people, I think.
Okay. I think we only have like a minute left. So I'm trying to see one that would...
We'll try to be fast. Something Morgan and I have never done.
Are we gonna see Malfurion at all in 10.2, or is he still just in Ardenweald?
I need a moment.
It's like, of all the lore questions you could have asked, we're like,
hold on. I'm trying to recall who all is going to be, because it's a big update. The Emerald Dream is a really big deal. There's going to be a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces we're going to meet along the way. Yes, I believe you are correct. That he is basically holding down the fort in Ardenweald.
Yeah,
he's basically has to
there.
hold Ysera's place and like balance her absence in Ardenweald, and kind of keeps that machine going, as it were, because somebody has to be there kind of holding down the fort. But there will be plenty of very iconic characters that you'll get to meet and be introduced with the Guardians of the Dream. I'm just going to plug the one that I'm most excited about, which is, again, if you saw the Fury Incarnate kind of awesome IGC that came out recently, we got to see Virinov. who she is amazing, and she actually kind of becomes a reluctant ally of ours in Guardians of the Dream. And you actually will get to embark on a quest line with her and Rathian as kind of a like, they're kind of like the black sheep of their family. And they actually go out to gather new allies. As we've seen, Virnoth and the Incarnates as a whole don't really agree with the Titans' plan and the Dragonflights and how they went about that. So she's out there essentially with Rathian looking to gather new allies, like the Netherwing, which you might have seen in the video, are people that she goes to try to bring into the fold as allies, as well as the Stormdrakes, which are super awesome. And they're hopefully be able to bring new allies back in the defense of Amir Drasil.
Yeah, so a lot of cool dragons, a lot of cool dragons from other expansions. Malfurion, not a dragon. He's not invited. He's sleeping. He's doing his own thing.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I was a little nervous. I've never done anything like this before. And I didn't feel like I had like too many 10-2 questions. They're kind of general, but I appreciate you guys taking the time,
Yeah. No,
it's all good.
We love answering questions. It's only a bummer if you ask something and we're like, I would love to talk about that. And, we want to give you something, but it's not something that's coming out immediately, right? Which is sometimes a bummer for people to hear, so yeah. But no, I think you did great.
Awesome.